All right, for tonight, we're going on to our next chapter. That's our initial discussion, chapter 7. After that, the test is available for you to do tonight if you wish. If you're too tired or have other things, you can take it tomorrow. We talked about extending the due date for the exam until tomorrow at midnight. So if that's a better choice for you, you certainly can take advantage of that. And we'll do that for the rest of the semester. So the due date for the exam will be pushed off one day, back one day. We are off next week, right? So don't forget that. We are not meeting next week. So this chapter here, all the due dates are 2 weeks away. And if I look at Blackboard here, March 25th is the due date, which is a Monday. Can someone verify that? Did I have the right day there?
Yeah, it's Monday.
Monday. The day we come, or that's the week we come back, and then the exam I push to the 27th, which is a Wednesday. Okay? So I've adjusted that due date already. Now, for tonight, we'll do our overview of Chapter 7. This begins on page 333. It's a cost volume analysis, and the big computation in Chapter 7 is break even. So it's critical for a company to understand its break-even point, because our goal is obviously to do more than break-even. Break-even means basically zero profit. At what point does a company attain that zero profit? After that, we're good, right? We should be able to make quite a bit of money after that point. It talks about Amazon taking 5-6 years to break even. So they basically lived on loans until they reached that break-even point. So Boeing is the company profile. They talk about December as being their very, very critical period between Christmas and New Year's. That's where they make a majority of their money, is in that 1 week time frame. So take a look at those examples as you go through the chapter. It's always nice to see a real-life example. So what do we need to determine a break-even point? Well, first off, we need to know how costs behave, because in order to determine a break-even point, you need to understand which costs are variable in behavior and which ones are fixed. We also need to know with some certainty what the sales volume could be, maybe, and what price that we would have charged for that sales volume. So all of these are uncertain. We don't know for sure what our costs will be. We don't know what our sales volume will be, right? But we have to do our best at predicting those types of amounts or behaviors. I'm not going to read line by line, but just definition-wise on page 334, know this for the multiple choice question. What is break even? It means at what point of sales or revenue do we have to hit in order to have a zero profit or income, right? That's what we're trying to determine. Do you think all companies know their break-even point? Very few do. How come? People, yeah, a lot of companies don't know how to compute it, right?
Yeah.
Look at the cost behavior. How many companies with certainty know whether a cost is variable or fixed? Very few do. especially small companies. So that's some of the problems with this break-even analysis. Okay. So what do we need to determine it? And why do we have to determine it? So this cost value profit analysis is helping us to determine the units that must be sold and also help us to better manage our company. What impact does it have on our company if we don't hit that sales volume, right? We need to be able to determine that. Where can we increase our profit or price? What can we do to help that situation? So if we go to our first computation, and with managerial, before we do that, with managerial, we do not care whether it's a production cost or a selling and admin expense. Last semester or whenever you took cost, we only really concentrated on our production costs, material, labor, and overhead. Now in managerial, it's the whole company. We're going to look at all our costs, all of our expenses in this analysis. So, if we're looking at all of our costs and expenses, you'll notice now our income statements are organized differently into behaviors. So we will identify the variable behaviors first and identify the fixed behaviors second. And we'll organize, the variable will be located basically right underneath sales will be our variable expenses. We will subtract variable expenses and we'll get a new subtotal called what? What's sales minus variable? Our first subtotal is called contribution margin. And after that, we will subtract our fixed expenses to get our income. Is this a GAAP approved statement? GAAP approved. The answer is no. In GAAP, we can't organize our expenses by behavior. They want it a different way. So this is purely a management type statement that they would do internally. All right. So here's how it looks. This is on page, let me jump to there, 335, Exhibit 1. They give us some good examples of what is considered a variable cost or expense. You'll notice here on the table, direct labor is always variable. We've identified certain selling and admin expenses as being variable. Where's my materials? Right here is variable always. And then again, there might be some variable overhead. Indirect labor, if they're paid hourly. Supplies is considered variable overhead. And then after the margin is our fixed overhead. Also identify here that we will have a percent column, a vertical analysis again. How do I get my margin percent? What do I divide?
Divide by sales.
Divide by sales, right? So we're going to have our contribution margin in dollars divided by our sales in dollars. That will give us our margin percent. So in Chapter 7, you will be doing that computation quite often. Your 25-point problem is based on that margin percent. So you have to know how to do that computation. So margin is just that difference. Example 1 goes through that margin computation. And they have a lot of steps here, guys. So I'm just going to skip down here and look at the final result rather than going slide through slide. Couple things on this. This is on page 336 now. Not only is there a margin percent, there's also a margin per unit, right? In this case, it's the difference between the selling price, 400 in this example, and the variable expenses of 325. And in some instances, some of our computations will be based on a margin per unit, 75. So margin per unit, selling price per unit, cost per unit, right? As opposed to other computations, I want a margin percent, which in this case is 75 over 400, right? That's what you told me. Selling price divided by, or margin per unit divided by selling price per unit, that gives us our margin percent. Can someone tell me what this is? 75 divided by 400? Does it come out nice or not really?
Yeah, 0.19.
Yeah, 19%.
All right, 19%, let's just say that. Round it to two places. So, sometimes, again, with our questions, the answer they want is in a margin per unit, in this case 75, or they may want the answer as a margin percent. So realize the difference between the two. That's the goal here. So my question, is 400,000 the company's break-even point? Is 400,000 the break-even point here? The answer is no. How come it's no?
Because they have to subtract the variable expenses.
What does this amount have to be in order to be break-even?
We need to subtract the expense, is like variable expense and fixed cost.
Yeah, we do that, but what does this have to be in order to be break-even?
0.
0. So that's why the 400,000 is not this company's break-even. Should we figure it out? What is the break-even? So if I'm looking at this example, and this is the first computation for this particular chapter, you'll have, what is the break-even in units? Quite a bit of the exam is based on this. So to compute that, we need FC in dollars over the contribution margin per unit. Does everybody know what FC means?
Fixed cost.
Fixed cost, or expenses now. Remember in managerial, we're looking at all fixed costs, not just the production ones. So looking at our example here, what do we have in total fixed expenses?
45,000.
45,000, right? And what is my margin per unit?
You have to 75.
75. So 45,000 divided by $75 per unit gives me
600. 600.
600 units. That's my break even in units. 600. So if I put in $600 units into this income statement, instead of 1,000, I would break even or have a zero profit. So the author goes through that process of finding this level of sales. Why is this so important for a company to know?
So they can know how much.
Before the year starts, they would figure this out. Why is that important to know?
So they can know the unit to sell, how much.
How many? Right. So that's for the full year. How much do I need to sell in a month then? 50, right? So let's say in January, is January a good month to sell mowers? Not here, right?
They grow.
So you probably are not going to hit 50 in January, are you not? So if let's say I did sell 30 or 40, let's say I sold 40 in January, Christmas maybe. What do I have to do in February to make it up? I got to sell 60 because I was short 10. Do you see how that's, do you ever hear of a sales quota? Companies sometimes use that. I have to have a sales quota, or I got to meet my sales quota. Well, this is where it's coming from, right? Because if I don't meet it this month, guess what? I got to work a little harder next month. Do you see how management-wise that's better than waiting till the end of the year and say, oh gosh, we didn't sell enough. Shame on me, right? That's the difference. You're managing the business. You're not reacting to what's happening. It's much better to manage the business, right? Much less stressful. Or running a company is stressful anyway. All right. So that's the goal with Chapter 7, is to come up with this kind of analysis. So they go through this process with problem 2 now of coming up with the 600 mowers. And guess what? We're right. So every unit I sell, how much money am I making? Every mower I'm selling, how much am I making? From this slide. I'm making $75, right? My margin. Every unit I sell, I'm making 75. That's what salespeople really like. They want to know how much money you're making on every unit. Because if I sell 600, guess what? I cover my fixed cost. Does everybody know what I mean when I say cover? I'm able to recover my fixed cost. Now if I sell 700 units or 800 units, does my fixed cost change? No. That's the beauty of knowing which costs don't change with changes in sales. So if I go above 600, guess what? If I make 601 or sell 601 units, my profit is $75, right? If I make 602 units, how much is my profit?
150.
150. I don't have to create a new income statement. In fact, when you do your problems for your 25-point problem, they ask you specifically, don't do a new income statement. You can figure out the income without it. That's the goal here, is for companies to know this. So that I don't wait till the end of the year and say, oh, I should have sold more. All right. Let's try a couple of problems like this, like 7.2. Let's start with 35 in our analysis here. Or problem 35, or exercise 35. Let's see how we do. Again, so much of what we deal with on a daily basis is terminology. This is on page 377. We actually have two questions. What is the variable cost per unit? What is the margin per unit? So looking at exercise 35, what is a variable cost? What's the first one?
The factory overhead.
Isn't direct material the first one?
No,
That's a variable cost, right? $4.98. Direct labor is always variable. They're paid hourly, $2.10. Also, variable overhead has the word variable in it. $1. And since and remember, these are product costs, right? Those three. But in managerial, we go beyond. We look at the entire organization, right? So now we include variable selling and admin at $2. We add them up.
10.08.
How much is it?
$10.08.
$10.08
Yes.
per unit. So on some problems, I'll ask for just that. Just what is the variable cost per unit? Okay, next question. What is my margin per unit?
$13.92.
How did you get $13.92?
With the sale,
What was the selling price for this product?
$24. Sometimes with the variable cost.
Now you subtract the variable cost of 10.08.
Yeah.
We get $13.92 per unit. So for every unit I sell, I make $13.92. These are all predictions, right? The selling price, do we always sell to every customer at $24? Sometimes we might give discounts though for certain ones. So we have to be aware of those. Do we know for certain whether our material cost will remain throughout the entire year at $4.98? It may not, right? A tariff kicks in, and all of a sudden my material cost is up 10%, 25%. Do you think those manufacturers are freaking out? They do. If something changes that they weren't planning on. Because all of a sudden now my break even jumps higher if my costs change, right? All right. Going forward here, switching from units to now what? I'm looking for a ratio. In chapter 7, we always divide by what to get our ratio?
The total, not total.
The revenue, the sales, right? So my margin is, I'm going to switch gears here, $13.92 per unit divided by what?
24. The
24, the selling price per unit. The same is true on the variable cost side. $10.08 divided by 24. So, what's my ratio on the margin?
You want in percent or just
20%?
no? You said you want in percent or
Yeah, well, yeah, a ratio is always a percent.
58%.
58?
Yeah.
Did that come out perfectly?
Yes.
So this has to be then what?
42.
42. What does 42 plus 58 equal?
100.
Has to equal 100, right? Has to. So those are my ratios. Now what's great about a ratio is I can see an analysis. I can see trends to see if this ratio is going up, which is margin is going up, that's good. Or if it's coming down every month, and that's bad. So here again, once I have a ratio that is my goal, I can set this as my goal every month. I can see if that goal is being hit or not. If it's going higher than the goal, that's great. But if it's going lower, I got to figure out what's going on. Which one of these expenses is changing, right? What's happening? All right, so what is my break-even point in units? What's my fixed cost?
For 26,500
And
times by
we have more than one fixed cost, right?
15,260.
Yeah, we're going to add two of them together. In managerial, we looked at all fixed costs, both production and selling and admin. We've got to cover both of them. So what's an example of a fixed cost?
because it's like for
Aren't-
the rent,
Rent,
and
salaries payable, right? Both production salaries
yeah, the
as well as
office
salaries in the
supplies.
office
Yeah.
and admin section, right? Those are the big ones. So we add up all those fixed cost behaviors together, we get these numbers. What am I going to divide by to get the break even in units?
Unit contribution margin.
The contribution margin per unit, which is what?
1390.
1392, right? Our red number here. Why did we not use the 58%? Why did we not use the 58% here?
Because we need break-even point in unit.
If I'm asking for units, I got to divide by a per unit number, right?
Yeah.
So on the test, on your problems, make sure you're doing apples and apples, not apples and oranges. So the key is, if you want a break even in units, you've got to make sure your margin's in a unit measurement, not in a percent measurement. Is that clear? Because a lot of mistakes happen here. If I want break even in units, I got to divide by a margin per unit. So how much is this? How many units do I get?
3,000.
3,000 even, Melissa? And that's for the year, right? We're using your fixed costs, so that's for the year. So now I can do my budget, and that's what we're going to in Chapter 9. We're going to take this budget and spread it across our entire operation for a number of quarters or months. So much per month, so much per quarter is the goal. Anything above it, I'm making money. Anything below it, I'm losing money. And I better react quickly. Let's do one more computation here because the book talks about it. What's my break-even point in sales? It's the same computation we just did with a little modification. So we still have our fixed costs on top in dollars, 26,500 plus 15,260 in selling costs that are fixed. But now, since we want sales, guess what number we're going to use?
The sale price
Not the sale price. What's the bottom number we're going to use?
of those sales.
Margin ratio.
Margin ratio, yeah.
58% goes on the bottom. So break even in units, we got to divide by margin per unit. If we want break even in sales dollars, that's the change here. Sales dollars, now I have to divide by the margin percent to get that number. So a lot of, again, chapter 7 is definition, making sure you understand the ratios and what's in them. So if I take this fixed cost, divide it by 58%, what do I get?
72,000.
In dollars, right? Not units at this point. And you can get this number also by multiplying the break-even point in units by the selling price, which was 24. You get the same answer. So you can do it either way. Sometimes you'll have the tools to do it either way. Sometimes you have to use one or the other method. You won't have enough information to do it both ways. What do you think? Joel, are you excited? Was that
Yeah.
fun to do?
Yes.
That was so awesome.
Something that was.
By the way, I just want to make a note. You look so snazzy
Oh,
and perfect.
thanks.
That is awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
By the way, that was taped, so everybody knows now. It's like watching the Kardashians. Does anybody follow the Kardashians? What they're wearing?
No.
I do. Can you tell? I think. I mean, what Kyle or which one is the? Who's the one that gets that 1.2 or she's a billionaire? Is it Kyle?
I have no idea.
Gosh, I thought you guys would know all that.
No.
Maybe they take a class.
Maybe the day class does. So, if you can please, turn your page, all this is discussed on pages, the break-even dollars is on pages 338. And they really go through a lot of examples here. 338, 339, 340 is the actual computation that is shown, coming up with a variable cost as a ratio, margin as a ratio. The sum of those two is always going to be 100%. And actually, they make a mistake here. Can you imagine that? There's a mistake. I gotta look at this in the book. I think it's correct in the book. It's wrong in my notes. Yeah, it's right in the book. It's wrong in my notes. Look at this. Would you just look at this? Have you seen that video?
No, but
Did you see it, Tiffany? If you Google, you look at this, it's a guy that just says it. And my kids are fascinated with it. Let me show you the ratio here. This is on page 340. Here's my notes. I agree with this. But look what's wrong here. Oops. They obviously didn't have an auditor. What should be this rate? What does the book say this contribution margin ratio is, or should be?
8.187.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Oh. Little transposition error.
Mhm. Must be dyslexic.
Must be. Most often, these textbooks are not printed by quote-unquote accountants. Oh, although an accountant could make this mistake, but obviously somebody didn't catch that error. But in the textbook, thank goodness, it is correct at 18.75.
Or I would have found it.
Pardon?
I would have found it.
I know. Our students, and I've had students find errors in books, our students, and I've told the authors that they need to change them, and they do. The next edition, the change is made. All right. So let's go back to our problem 35. And it says prepare a income statement at the break-even point for 35. We found out that our break-even point in units was 6 or 3,000. And sometimes I do gloss over this, and I found that students need a little practice on a, this is the contribution margin statement. This is not a gap statement that you would learn in intermediate. So, because it's organized by behavior. What's my variable cost per unit for problem 35? What did we say it was? $10.80. So we take our calculator, we multiply this out. Come up with a income statement. So what this is trying to prove is that, does it really come out to zero? Does the profit really come out to zero? If it doesn't, we did something wrong.
240. Oh, it's minutes. These are both fixed together. Divided by the contribution margin.
How did I know the fixed cost was the same as the margin?
It's probably gonna be.
Because it's the break-even point. It has to be, right? But we can verify this. What two numbers do I add together on this problem to get the 41,760? Tiffany, you went too fast for me.
26,500 and 15,260.
Excellent. Good job. Couple things here, guys. If I wanted to find, I gave you an income statement. Sean, thank you for volunteering. Sean, if I give you this income statement, can you tell me what the contribution ratio is? What do I have to divide to get that ratio?
On the sales,
Yep. And what other numbers?
the contribution margin,
Yeah, in dollars, right? Which one's on top and which one's on the bottom?
it's the margin on top and the sales on the bottom.
It's like, can you give me that ratio? You don't even have to compute it because it's already done.
Oh. was 58.
58%. How did we get the 58% without having an income statement though?
From the fixed cost.
That was the margin per unit divided by the sale per unit.
Yes. For the test, you gotta know both ways. Okay? Sometimes I'll give you the unit numbers and sometimes I'm gonna give you an income statement number. Your 25-point problem, I'm only gonna give you an income statement, right? So you have to know both ways to do it. Does everybody understand what I just did? If you didn't, please let me know. I get paid by the question, I told you that, right, last week?
Can you say it again?
I would like you to be able to do this contribution margin ratio using an income statement format or a per unit format. So in here, in this case, if I'm given an income statement, I take the margin in dollars, divide it by the sales in dollars.
90%.
I get 58%,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
As the same as if I took a per unit number. What was my sales per unit? 24. My margin per unit was 13.98 or 13.92. Sorry. I get the same 58%. What would I do to get the variable cost ratio?
Use the variable cost and divide by sales.
Yeah, take the 30,240 divided by the 72,000. Would I even have to do that to get the margin ratio? If I know what the contribution margin is, it's the complement. Does everybody know what I mean by complement? Oh boy, complement.
I.
I thought it was an E. Are you sure it's I?
C-O-N-T-O-M-E-N-T, yeah.
Those two are working together, right?
T then A.
They have to equal 100%. So I see students do the division, which is great, but if I already know it's 58, this has to be 42. You don't even have to do the division. You got it already. It's all about efficiency in a lot of things, right?
Yeah.
All right. 61, I like 61. Let's look at it quick. And then we'll take our first break. So this is algebra, baby.
I love it.
Yeah.
So cool. Because it's pretty easy computation so far. Just division, right? So they got to spice it up a little bit with the difference analysis. 386, are we there, guys? Break even is 2,400 units. Equals what? What's my top number? Total fixed cost, which is what?
67.
Good so far. All right. That was the easy one. What do we divide by to get the 2,400? What's our normal formula?
The margin percent
No, careful, not percent,
per unit.
per unit, right? What's my margin per unit? We don't know what it is, do we?
We have to.
But we do know the
use
formula.
price.
What's the formula to compute our margin per unit?
We have to use the price subtract by the unit variable cost.
Okay, so how do I do that algebraically? X is always the unknown, so what's X?
X the price, we don't know the price.
X is the selling price. So how do I write this bottom denominator as a margin per unit?
So would it be
And
like 2,400 times X?
No, not 2,400 times X.
Divide?
Do they give us the variable cost per unit?
Yes.
42?
Yes.
How much?
42?
Okay. So how do I write this down here on the bottom?
Subtract the price, subtract the unit variable cost, that means.
So how do I write, you're right, Vashri. So how do I write that down here?
We have
Isn't it X minus 24? Or 42? Thank you, Jill. X minus 20, why do I do that? 42,
gonna be zero first.
right? X minus 42 is the same thing as margin per unit, is it not? But I just did it in a formula. I'm just not feeling the love for algebra here right now. Does that make sense, what we're doing? Because I don't know the margin per unit because I don't know X. So I got to convert that unknown to a formula so that I can use it. All right, not that this is an algebra class, but I thought it would be fun to do. So, now that I know this is the formula, X minus 42. How do I get X by itself?
Multiply by X minus 42.
Yes. So I'm going to rewrite this equation. So Tiffany's right. I multiply both sides by X minus 42. On the right side, it disappears because it's just basically dividing by itself, which is 1. And then on the left side, I'm multiplying it by 2,400. So now I have 2,400x minus 2,400 times 42. Remember doing this in algebra?
Yeah.
2,400 times 42.
100,800.
Now I'm getting it down to the where I can solve it. Now what do I do?
Yeah.
Add. Very good. That becomes 0. What do we have left? Now what do I do?
Move X.
Divide. Very good. Both sides of the equation. Melissa, what do I have?
70.
Here's my answer. Happy, happy, happy. That was so much fun.
Don't you add?
Don't you add the 100 to 800
to both
Yeah.
both sides?
Oh yeah. Did we do that, Melissa?
I didn't, but
Shoot.
You just didn't write
sorry
it.
what the
You have
It's
to.
still 70.
Yeah, you just didn't write it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. It's 168. The result is still 70.
Yes?
You just didn't give me the numbers. You did it correctly, right? 168.
Even, 1,000, yeah, even.
that gives you the 70. Thank you for the correction. Now I'm happy. So I can try it. I can put 70 in here, right? My margin is what? 28? 67,200 divided by 28 per unit should give me the 2,400 units. And number 2 is the same way. It's just looking at a variable cost. It's the same formula, just unknown as variable cost. We won't do that. We spent enough time on that. It was just for fun. There are not going to be any questions like that on the exam. So, but maybe over break I'll just fill it out in case somebody would like to look at it later. So let's take a break, stop here, and then we'll pick up and do some more computations that are on this analysis end. I thought I started that bloody clock and I didn't, so I missed about a bit. 20 minutes maybe? Sorry guys. Okay, so I'm going to take my fixed cost. What is my fixed cost in total?
Maybe 4,920.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I'm going to divide by what? 22. How many packages are we looking at here?
3860.
How much?
3860.
3,860.
0.
3,000.
860.
860?
Mm-hmm.
But that's packages, right? I don't want my break even in packages. I want it for DVDs and I want it for sets.
Mm-hmm.
So we got done with step 2.
Times by 6.
Now we got times it by the mix, right? So let me get down here. Not sure where I have them. So what was my mix here?
3 and 1. DVD 3. And set 1.
3,000.
860.
Thank you. What's the other one? So you multiply it out. 11,580. Guess what the test will ask for, or guess what one of the choices on the test will be when we get to this question. The test will ask, how many DVDs? And one of the answers will be 3,860. What's the correct answer? 11,580. Why would one of the choices be 3,860?
The package.
That's the number of packages, and sometimes students don't do the third step, right? They get the break even in packages and say, oh, I'm done. Well, you're not quite done. So don't forget to multiply by the mix to get the number of units. All right? Don't forget the final step. So get the mix, get the margin for each, 4 and 10, multiply by the mix to get the package margin, find the package break even, and then use that break even to multiply by the mix. Quite a couple different steps here. So this is a good one to have as a resource if you can. so that you can deal with those questions. And they always have the answer cannot be determined or something like that. Most of them have a way to figure it out, so that's just messing with your mind. Or maybe you're tired at that point and that's what you choose. That happens too. What do you think? Can you handle this? Sean? How do you think?
I think I can get it.
Think you can get it? You'll get some practice, right? I mean, you got 2 weeks to work on your homeworks this time. So enjoy that 2-week period. It won't happen after that. All right. Let's move forward, guys. Okay. Risk. I'm so glad Joe and Sean are here because they are in the banking world. A lot about what banks have to look at is a company's risk. Before you give out a loan, you have to make sure that they have addressed their risk. And look at all the projections in the world. There's so many unknowns, pricing, costs, even sales volume. That's all uncertain stuff. So what we're going into now is to do a risk analysis. How prone is our company to risk, right? How prone are we to risk? Because I don't want to give out a loan to somebody that has a huge risk, okay? So this uncertainty that we're going to deal with, one of the measurements they came up with is this sensitivity analysis. And one of the ones they look at is margin of safety. What does this mean? It's a very simple type of analysis. This margin of safety is on page 359. It's a simple subtraction. Very easy computation. And if you look at the example, it says simple subtraction of their current sales, in this case is 500, and their break-even sales, which is 200. Another math error. Oh my gosh, this is number 2. What is this difference? Okay. Sean, what do you think about this margin of safety of 300? You're looking at this company. They're currently selling 500. They did this wonderful break-even analysis and said it was 200. 300 is the margin of safety. Would you loan them the money?
Probably.
Probably. Okay. Why?
Their margin of safety is more than double what their sales are.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's a huge margin of safety. So even if my sales drop 10%, 20%, I'm still covered, right? I'm still breaking even. 50%. If my sales drop 50%, I'm still covered. That's a pretty safe company. But that's what the margin of ratio is showing you, is how safe you are. Okay? Or if costs do change by 10%, 20%, I'm going to be okay. I'm still making money. So then I would be more inclined to give them the loan. So that's all we're doing here. So the author, again, does the simple subtraction either in units or in dollars, right? And the margin of safety in dollars is simply taking the current sales dollars minus the break-even dollars to come up with, this one they do have right, the margin in dollars, okay? And then there's a ratio. I don't know how this is appropriate, but you can do a ratio. 300 over the sale is the ratio. So the bigger the number, right, the better. That's what we're looking at here. Isn't this cute? Graphically, here we are. Difference is the margin of safety. Simple, simple, simple. All right. Now, this is the one I really wanted to get to. We'll discuss it first. This is page 360. This is a 25-point problem, as well as your test, obviously. It's called the degree of operating leverage. What is operating leverage? You have to know this definition. Here it is, page 360. Operating leverage is the use of fixed costs to extract a higher percentage of change in profit as sales activity changes. Okay. What are U.S. companies doing to be more competitive? We're buying more equipment. That's what a fixed cost is. What's our biggest fixed cost? It's depreciation on equipment, right? So we're using more fixed costs to generate our income as compared to other countries that might be using more variable costs, which is what? China is using what? More variable costs, more labor, right? So that's the difference. That's the analysis we're looking at here. Know also what is meant by cost structure. How much of our costs are fixed compared to variable? How is our structure of our company? All right. How is this computed? Example 10 is the example. It's a number. 2.5. You're taking your margin in dollars divided by your income. Please add this in your notes. The higher the DOL, the more sensitive you are to sales changes. Think of GM. Think of GM, what happened in 2008. Their sales tanked. And that company went under in a heartbeat. Okay? Because they are heavily, heavily mechanized. Huge amounts of fixed costs. Any drop in sales, they were done. And they took a lot of people with them. Good thing they got a loan from us, right? From the government. Otherwise they wouldn't be here. So, that's what the DOL measures. The higher the number, the more sensitive you are to changes in sales levels. Please know that. We're going to look at this when we do some of our problems. Let's just try one once. 63. And then we'll take our break here. 63. Page 387. All right, we have two different companies. What's neat about Duncan and McDuff, they make the same amount of money, 25 grand. Right? Same amount of money. So they look like, on the surface, they look like pretty similar companies. But let's look at their DOL and see the difference. So let's start with Duncan. To figure out the DOL, it's contribution margin in dollars divided by operating income in dollars. $75 over 25 gives me what for the DOL? 3. McDuff, do the same thing. I'll do this in blue. Contribution margin in dollars, over the operating income in dollars. What's the margin, 225?
225, yeah.
Over 25
9.
is what?
9.
9. So which company is more sensitive to sales changes? McDuff, right? So as a banker, what does that mean?
More risk.
More risk. Yep. That's what we're trying to measure. Which company is at more risk for a change in revenue or a change in cost, right? If my variable costs go up, that's really going to hurt me more than the other company. Much more sensitive. Okay. Let's compute the break-even point for Duncan. Oh, in dollars. This is good. Good practice. What's on top? What's on the bottom for Duncan? These are great questions for the test. What's on the
Fixed cost.
fixed cost on top, which is how much for Duncan?
50,000.
50. That one's easy. How do I get the bottom number? What is the bottom number?
Is the one in sale have to be done now, the margin, the same.
The margin
Yeah, 75.
percent, right? Looking at Duncan, what is the margin percent?
I think I see it.
You get my ratio, what's always on the bottom?
The seating. No, sale.
The sale.
Mm-hmm.
What's on the top?
The margin.
Margin?
Yeah.
Yep. 75. What is that ratio? 20%? Right? That's my bottom number. So if my margin is 20%, for every dollar of sales, how much money am I making?
27.
cents. Does everybody hear that? For every dollar of sales, I am making 20 cents on every dollar. Again, a huge ratio to know for a company. All right, let's do McDuff. Fixed cost was 200,000. What's its margin ratio? Pretty high.
60%.
60%. And we got that number by just basically taking the margin divided by the sales, 375 again. Gives us the 60%. So the break even here is, under Duncan, how many dollars?
250.
250?
Yeah. 250%.
And under McDuff?
$333,333 and 33 cents.
Let's just go in a rounded dollar amount. Perfect. Excellent. Okay, looking at the break-evens between the two companies, which one's more risky? McDuff. What are their current sales? 375, right, for both companies? Look at the margin of safety difference. Very small over here, right? Very small. Oops. So here again, if I were a banker and they came to me looking for money, I'd be very scared about McDuff. Any little bit of change and they're below break even, right? As opposed to Duncan. Got a little more wiggle room there. And bankers think that way. They want to get paid, right? So this is kind of that analysis again as to who am I going to give the money to? All right. Getting down to now using the DOL. The question is, compute the percentage change in profits if sales increase by 30%. So my percentage change in sales was 30. What was my DOL for Duncan?
3.
DOL is
3.
3, right? My profits are going to go up 90%. That's awesome. That's pretty cool. A 30% change in my sales will make my profits go up 90%. How about McDuff? Same number, 30%. What's my DOL? 9, which means what? A 270% increase in profits for McDuff. Now which company would you rather be with? McDuff, right? 30% change in sales, my profits are gonna increase 270%. That's the beauty of a mechanized company. I'm extracting profits quicker, right? With fewer variable costs using machinery to do it. But it's a double-edged sword. If I'm going up 30%, I'm going up in profits 270. But if I go down in sales by 30%, guess what my profit does? It goes down 270%. And hence, that's why they are more risky. That's cool. What do you think? I need to take a break, I think. And then we're going to do a little bit of review. And then I'm done. About 30 minutes yet. Can you handle that?
Mm-hmm.
Also. So let's take our break here, and then we'll practice some of this stuff. Couple more things before we leave this problem, Duncan and McDuff. I'm going to add to this question. How much room do you have on? Do you have note room? A little bit.
Thank you.
A little bit left.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to do Duncan. If my profits are going up 90%, everybody see Duncan on page 387? How much in dollars is that? My profits are going up 90% for Duncan. What dollar amount is it? What's the dollar of increase?
Increase from the operating income.
Is it 18? No, just this.
7.
22,500. Okay, so on the test, I might ask you for the percentage of increase, which is 90. That's cool. But I may also ask, well, okay, what's the dollar of increase in income? Or I might ask, what is the new income? In this case, the new income would be 25 plus the 22.5. So that's 47.5. So again, on the test, I might ask you, what is the percentage change? 90. I might ask you for what is the increase in income, which is 22.5. Or I might ask you, what is the new income level going to be? 47.5. Do you see how complicated this can get in a hurry? Does everybody know how I got the increase?
Yeah, no.
22.5.
Use this amount to
I took the 90% times 25, which was the old income, right?
Yep.
That gave me the new income.
Right.
The reason we're asking this question is students can get the percentage, the 90, because it's just a formula, right? But then they don't know how to use the formula, the 90. What does that mean? Well, that's the increase in my profits. So if I increase my sales by 30%, my profits are gonna jump $22,500. Does that make sense? Everybody understands what the difference is. Now, can someone tell me how to verify that 22.5? There's another way to get the 22.5. How do I do that? Looking at the income statement, I want you to use the contribution margin percent to verify it. What's my margin percent? It was 20, right? I thought we computed it. Oh, here it is.
Yeah, 20.
20% was my margin. Okay. The question is, what do I multiply the 20% by to give me the increase in profits?
Divide 20% by 2.
Yeah, that's cheating though. You can't do that.
Uh,
What is the number, by the way, Tiffany? Did you figure it out?
No, I didn't.
Take 22.5 divided by 0.2. What do we get?
4,500.
Hmm?
125,000.
How much?
125,000.
Yeah, that sounds better.
That's a mistake.
Okay.
Yeah.
But what is the 125? On the income statement, where does the 125 go? That's our increase in what? Sales.
I got 112.5.
So many answers here.
It's 22500 divided by 22. 112.5.
What?
Wait, did I mistype again?
Okay.
So it's
112,500. This is our increase in sales dollars. What did our sales increase by? 30%, right? That's how I want you to get the 112.5. Do I have to give you 30% on the test? I can say sales were 375,000 last year, right?
Mhm.
Sales are going up 112,500. How will that affect my income?
Second. Use the.
So let's go back to what I asked.
Okay.
Divide 112.5 by 375.
Yes, exactly. Remember percentage of change.
Mhm. Use the old
the increase divided by the old number, right? So here's the scenario. I'm going to ask for the percentage change in profits using the DOL. But I don't give you the 30%. It's the same question, but I don't give you the 30%. What do I give you? I give you the increase in sales. The increase in sales were 112,500. What is the percentage change in income using the DOL? So I got to figure out the 30% first. And then multiply that 30% by the DOL. That means my profits are going up 90%. There's my answer. Without giving you the sales percentage of increase.
What do you say?
I'll try it one more time. If I don't give you the sales percentage of increase, you might have to figure it out yourself. That's what I'm trying to get at here. So on the test, I might say, this is the increase in sales, 112.5. What is the DOL, or what is the percentage change in profits using the DOL of 3? I could do it that way too. I don't have to. You don't have to compute the DOL. I can give you the DOL of 3. I know it's late. I know it's hard to concentrate at this point. But I can throw a wrench in your question very easily by just changing a few things. That's what I want you to be prepared for. How much money am I making for every dollar of sales? How much am I making on every dollar of sales?
For what company?
20 cents, right? 20 cents. 20% is my margin. So if my sales are going up 112,500, you take 20% of that number to get the change in income, right? Which in this case is 22,500. Take a look at those. Let's look at your problem, your 25-point problem. $53. Can have you turn, I know you might be doing something else, but please turn to page 3, chance here. The 25-point problem. Problem, if you understand the relationship of percents, both variable cost percent and margin percent to sales, if you understand this relationship very well, this problem is about a 25-minute, 30-minute problem. It doesn't take long. I'm not saying everybody will do it in that time frame, but I'm just saying it's not too bad. Question 1, what is the unit margin what is the break even in units, what is the margin ratio, and what's the break even sales in revenue. Okay? Those are all using the income statement as it's shown right now. It is a contribution margin statement, so my variable costs are listed first. Subtract to get our margin, and this is selling 200,000 units. So I'm not even going to go over question 1. I do want to mention, for the margin ratio, round the margin ratio to 4 places. It's a decimal entry, not a percent. So this number right here, the margin ratio, is a decimal to 4 places. It's not a percent number. So on the test, in your exercises and problems, be aware that sometimes it will be a percent that they want and not a decimal. For questions 2 and 3, and this is what I want to point out, this is the note I want you to make, you will use this ratio to figure out the answers for questions 2 and 3. Do not create a new income statement. So in question 2, I have it memorized because I get lots of questions on questions 2 and 3 from students. In question 2, the sales are going up $1 million. We know how margin works, right? For every dollar of sales, I'm going to get this many cents. Has to be. So my margin's going to go up, right? If I have more sales. But to get the million, I had to spend how much? What does problem 2 say?
Increased advertising budget,
By how much, Melissa?
250,000.
Yeah. So my margin went up, but my fixed costs went up also by 250. That's what you need to consider when we come up with what is the change in income for question 2. That makes sense? Question 3 is even easier. The question says, sales are going up 1.5 million. How does that affect my income? No additional cost. So it's slam dunk, easy as pie. Okay? Question 4 then, compute the margin of safety in dollars, right? Simple subtraction. Question 5 is compute the degree of operating leverage, a division, right? Margin dollars over income dollars, DOL, simple division, it's a number. And then the second part of question 5 is if sales go up, what does that say?
If sales revenue,
If sales revenues are 8% greater than expected, what is the percentage increase in operating income?
Yes. That's our DOL times the 8% you said?
Yeah.
I wasn't listening, Melissa.
Yeah, 8%.
Okay, thank you. But know what that increase means. So if you multiply your DOL times 8% and you get 40% as your answer, that means this income, 1.1445 million, goes up 40%. Is that what I said? I hope it was. Because then my video is not very good, is it? Did everybody hear that? What does the DOL tell us? When I multiply that DOL, 8%, Melissa?
Mm-hmm.
If I multiply this 8% times the DOL. Now, this is not the DOL for the problem. 3 times 8 is what?
4.
My profits are going to go up 24%, right? This number times 24% will be the change in income. Right? How else can I get this change? I almost ripped the board right off. How much is this change in income? How can I do that? How can I get that same number using my margin percent, right? Isn't that my second way to figure out the same thing? For every dollar of sales change, I'm making 24 cents on that change, right? Melissa said the change was 8%. But I can't take percent times percent. I got to take percent times dollars of change. How do I figure out the dollar of change? 8% of what number? No, no, no.
The operating?
No, no, no.
So
14,210,000, right? If that goes up 8%, guess what? The margin percent times that dollar amount will give me the change in income. You can verify that answer. Now, it's a bloody shame that the next box over doesn't ask for a change in income. But guess what? On the test, it's going to. You have 2 ways to get that answer. That's what I want you to do. That's how comfortable I want you to be in your analysis. That's where you got to get to. If you want to use Excel, #awesome. That would be cool, wouldn't it? Couldn't you put DOL in your little old Excel formulas? Sure you could. Or a Martian ratio. Martian ratio. I did that on purpose to see you away. The margin ratio. You could key in a box with the sale number in it, and the box above it will be the margin dollars. It automatically computes the margin percent for you. And if you want to, put a change in sales or whatever. Be creative with your Excel worksheets and use them on the test. It'll save you time and keying in the numbers here. Look how many, we had a mistake on 122 versus 112. That's a big mistake. Because we keyed it in wrong, maybe. I suppose you can key it in wrong on an Excel worksheet too. But you know what I mean?
Is 24% random number?
Yes.
Oh.
Well, we got that through our 3 times 8%,
Yeah.
which is a random number.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Your DOL is going to be different on this problem. I forget what it was. I can't tell you anyway.
Right.
That's one of the questions, is it not?
Yes.
Yeah, number 5. What is the DOL?
Yeah.
So that will
All right. I'm going to capture this. Will this help to capture this? I don't know. It's too messy. What do you think?
I think so.
I'll just do it. All right. It's in the notes for today. Now, guys, I didn't go through all these. And there's some notes here, additional ones. What I will do on those other problems, I will take my notes from my day class
DOL.
or other classes, throw them into my notes for tonight's class, so that if you walked into practice on package margin or some of those other problems, the answer key will be out there for you. So until you work with it, with your problems and exercises, and see now, for us to do more of just copying me is not going to help you, in my mind. All right? That sound right?
What was that?
I'm amazed how teachers can talk for 5 hours. There are some here, and I'm just totally amazed that they can do that.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
How do you do that? I can't. So anyway, I'm going to stop here. The rest of the class is yours to work on homework, to do the test if you wanted to. You're done. Or whatever, or other classes. Miss Jill. Multitasking tonight. Awesome. Always. Good deal. All right, sounds good. Well, everyone, please enjoy your holiday.